And I'm just going to start in Godot. And there's just a quick thing that I want to show you guys that we haven't really talked about yet. So I'm just going to show that, and then we'll get into some documentation. But if you have questions about other stuff that we've been working on, I'm happy to go. So just to recap where we are, we started with this Blake project template, talked a little bit about the interface, and then we started designing our first level. So that's what we did the other day. Right now our level is pretty boring. I'm gonna let you guys continue to work on these and just explore creating stuff on your own. Next week, I'm gonna talk a little bit about level design and thinking about the progression through a level to give you guys a little bit more to think about in terms of what you want your level to the experience to look like. But for now, I want you guys to just explore stuff and just get used to the software. I made this little tree guy so I can make as many trees as I want to. And I created like an instance of a scene. I can make copies of it, which is an important skill in Godot, but in most game design programs, but a lot of just general programs. But one thing that we haven't really talked about at all is scripting, is actually the code that makes this run. And there isn't actually a lot of code right now, other than the engine. The engine obviously is its own code that makes the engine run, but we also can add code in there. And I'm sure you guys have very different backgrounds, so I'm not going to assume that anybody has taken a programming class before. So anytime that we talk about programming, it's going to be from like a very introductory component. But one thing I do want to show you guys to get started is adjustments that we can make to the scripts that may make it, you may want to change to change the experience of the game. So for example, when I play the game, so I can move the mouse around, feels pretty normal. I can use the WASD keys to move, pretty typical. But you'll notice a couple things. I can jump a little bit, but the jumping is pretty slow. Moving is pretty slow. I can't change my move speed at all. So if you want to change those things, you don't have to. But if you want to change those those are things that are set by the code, the scripts that are attached to the player. So I'm going to hit escape to exit out of here. If I click on the player, you can see there's these icons over here. One of them is this like little scroll paper thing. And if I click on that, you're going to see this script. This is what makes the player work. And it's not actually all that much code. You can see all the code here. It's not really that much considering what it does, which is make the player work, because it's using a lot of the code that's built into Godot. So there's a couple of things I'm going to point out in here, and then I'll let you guys, either work on it, either make these changes or not. It's up to you for this bit. I'm going to make my code look a little bigger. There we go. Okay. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how these scripts work. We're not going to make a new script or do anything like that today, but all the scripts in Godot start with something that looks like this. It says extends kinematic body. The player is a kinematic body node. So if we look at the player scene and this node at the top, you can see it looks like a little player. It's designed, kinematic body is basically a type of physics body that's designed to be moved either by the player or by the computer, like an NPC. If you right click on any bits of the code that have definitions and you go to look up symbol, it's going to take you to the documentation. So this explains how all the code works. So if you haven't written a lot of code in the past, it probably won't make that much sense. But if you've written some code or you want to learn more about it, this is where you're going to learn about what this thing does. So it tells you, it has a description of what it's used The cool thing about Godot is it also has links to tutorials. So you can click on this link, it's going to take you to the browser, and it's going to explain how this code works. So it's a really good way to learn stuff if you're curious. Then it has the actual code. So these are properties, these are parts of this thing, this object. And then methods are things that the object can do. So for my kinematic body, it has some basic stuff. It has like, is it on the ceiling? That's something that's worth knowing. Is it on the floor? That's something I want to know. Is it on a wall? And it has functions like move and collide, move and slide. You know, the nice thing about Godot code is it's pretty readable. It kind of tells you what it is. So if we go look at this, it shows us everything that it expects from this code. And we're not really going to write anything, but I'm just showing you guys this. So let's close this. So the next thing you're going to see here is this little hashtag, and then some stuff that doesn't really look a lot like the other code. This is called a comment. So most code, pretty much all code, has something called comment. Comments are parts of the code that get ignored by the program. They're for people to read. And so when I write comments in my code, it's usually for you guys to be able to understand what the code does. When professional developers write comments in their code, it's because most software is written by lots of people. Most software is hard to write. It takes a lot of people to write Godot, the software, for instance. And so when you change parts of the code or you add parts of the code, you have to put in comments to explain how it works to the developers. That way they don't have to spend all their time reading your code to figure out what it does. They can just read your comments and say, oh, I don't care about this part. I'm going to skip to the next. So anytime you see a hashtag, this is different in different languages, but in Godot script, which is the language we write code in for Godot, the hashtag gets ignored by the computer program. So then the next little bit, we're not going to go past here. We're just going to look at this for now. Anything that starts with VAR, or sometimes you'll see const, C-O-N-S-T. We're not going to talk about that right now, but that's the same thing, basically. You see VAR, this stands for variable. A variable is just a keyword, like a shortcut. So if you want to know the speed of the player, we're gonna make up this thing called speed, and we're gonna give it a number. And that way, later on in our code, you're gonna see like down here, I'm gonna use speed a lot. Like I use it here, I use it here, I use it here. So if I was just using the number, I'd have to put the number everywhere. But since I have a variable that knows what the number is, I can put the variable there, and then I can change the speed of my player without ever touching the rest of my code. So that's one of the reasons we use variables. And the nice thing about Godot is there's something cool I can do with this variable. So var means variable. This is the name of the variable. You can see there's certain rules for how this is written. It's just the name that you want to call it. You can call it whatever you want. Usually you can't use a space. So instead of spaces, sometimes you see underscore. So if a variable has two names like default speed, there's an underscore here because we can't use a space there. It has to be one of text. And then there's an equal sign and then a number. So we know that what the speed is 7. Okay, so there's a few other variables here: mouse sensitivity, gravity, jump, camera acceleration. There's also sprint speed, can sprint, toggle sprint, is sprinting. So actually, we're gonna go a little bit farther. So one of the coolest things about Godot and a lot of modern game engines is there's a way that you can expose variables to the. So what that means is if I put this special keyword at the front, export, now notice that the speed is in my inspector. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with my jump. I'm going to go to jump and I'm going to put export here. So now over here in the inspector, it shows the speed and the jump. So when I expose those variables to the editor, that means somebody can change those values without ever even opening the code. It also means that I can change those values in different levels. I can have one level where the character is really fast, and another level where the character is really slow if I want to. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to level 1 and click on the player. Now I have a speed and a jump value that I can change. So let's change the speed to like 14. Now if I run my scene again, I still look pretty slow, but I'm faster than I was before. Okay, let's see if I change the speed to something ridiculous like 100. I still look slow. Something weird is happening. Okay, let's look at that in a second. Let's try changing the jump value. So I'm going to change the jump value to 10. Okay, that we can see is very different. Okay, now I'm jumping really high. But I'm also really slow. Like I'm jumping very slowly. So we might want to change some stuff there as well. So what can we change? We can change our gravity. This is 9.8. That's what it should be, like 9.8 meters per second. But we can turn it up. It's a video game. We don't have to use real life. So let's export our gravity. I also don't know why the speed wasn't working, so I'm gonna look at the code first. I wasn't planning on showing this, but one of the nice things about Godot is you can print out values. So if I say print speed, it's going to show me the speed. And that'll be able to tell me if I messed something up in the. So let's go back here and change the speed to. I'm going to run this again. Okay, it's still 7. So yeah, there's something weird going on with this. Let's see. Okay. I'm gonna fix this later, and then I'll send you guys an up. Okay, so the speed isn't working right now for whatever reason, but so there's another part down here that we can expose. Oh wait, we want to do the gravity. So let's turn the gravity up. I'm going to turn the gravity up to 20. See how the jump looks. Okay, that's a little bit better. So I'm not jumping as high, but I'm falling a little bit faster. It looks a little, but it doesn't have to look normal. You can play around with these values until you get something. There's also mouse sensitivity. This is how fast your camera moves when you move the mouse. You don't have to export, you don't have to expose it. You can just leave it. But if it's too fast or too slow, you can change it there. You can change the camera acceleration if you want to. But then there's also this sprinting. So if we want to sprint, we can export can sprint. And the default for sprinting is that you have to hold shift. But there's also a toggle sprint option to just turn shift and stop sprinting. So that's another thing that you can update. So let's turn on can sprint. I'm going to reset my. And now, okay, now if I hold shift, I can sprint. That's cool. So that's one thing that we can do with the program to give the ability for the designer to change things without having to go into the code or make things work differently. Oh, that's a good question. So that's a combination of the code and something in the editor settings that I haven't actually covered with you guys. So there's like so many things that I have to like skip certain things that it's not just like throwing a million things at you at the same time. But I can show you that real quick. So in this part of the code, there's this thing called the input. So this is a default function that looks for all the input from the mouse and the keyboard. And you can see it right here. Here it is. Oh, actually, so this part is in the physics process. So there's a few different parts, but here, where you see stuff like this, input.get action strength move backward minus get action strength move forward. There's names for the different inputs. And the reason they do that is because different platforms have different inputs. Like you might have a gamepad, or you might have, WSD or arrows or whatever. The way that you set those is you go to project settings, and go to input. And so under here, so I added some stuff in here so this code would work, but you can change it if you want. It's all the way down here. So there's a bunch of UI stuff that you can't change because it's built into Godot. But here's the first one that I added, move forward. So you can change these keys. If you want to add a key here, you can just click the plus button and add a key, or add a joy button or a mouse button. And so there's move forward, move backward, move left, move right, jump. Change mouse input is like part of the code to be able to see the mouse. And then sprint is shift down. So you can change those keys if you want. No, I put them in there in the blank template so that we could skip that setup part of the setup. Uh, in a more like in the game design class, like we go everything each bit. But the 3D stuff, there's so much 3D stuff to go over. If we go over that first, it'll be like 3 weeks before we actually do it. So we'll probably come back to that later at some point, but that's where it is. All right, I think that's everything I want to cover. We have these variables. I don't know what's happening with the speed thing, but I'll fix that later. But we can also, I didn't export the sprint speed. We can change that. Export. So I could make the sprint speed like something. Yeah, I'll probably just fall off the platform. Yeah. Okay. So I can always reset these values too just by hitting the little reset button. Okay. So that's what I wanted to show you guys with Godot. Now I want to talk about documentation. So I'm going to kind of switch gears and do that. Let me actually just restart the video. Let's see.